and welcome to Changing Earth Behind the Scenes. I am your host, Sara F. Hathaway. I'm the author, producer, creator, audio editor, and so many different hats that I wear for the Changing Earth. I thought it was time that we do a show that introduces you to some of the themes, concepts of the Changing Earth, take a look at the world, at some of the characters, hot topics, and these kinds of things from the novel series. It's a 10-book novel series. You can find it at changingearthseries.com. But the Changing Earth series has been a really, really awesome journey that I went on in creating this 10-book novel series, creating the company podcast, meeting so many wonderful people along the way. And so I wanted to do a video series that really focused on some of the concepts from the books. And today we're going to do the world. So when I first started writing my books, honestly, I didn't have the full picture of what this disaster scenario is going to entail. So I started out with a reference from a report that I did in college. And I lived in the foothills of California by Sacramento. And they were debating putting this dam up there. And this dam, once completed, if it broke, it would have put a 100-foot wave into Sacramento about an hour later. So this is a lot of relevance that I got to really start my story as I was thinking, what would happen if I was down there, my family's up in the foothills, how would I handle this disaster scenario being separated from my family? So Changing Earth World, we have big earthquake damage. A lot of infrastructure is destroyed. There's a thing called liquefaction that can happen where the ground actually acts more like a liquid than a solid when it starts shaking. And all of these things really kind of haunted my mind. I've always been into prophets. I believe in the Lord very much. I read the Bible a couple times a day. And so, earthquakes are really prevalent in the end times there. Nostradamus predicted it. The Hopi, I love prophetic material. And I also love native lore. And all of these things, they all talk about this earthquake, this great quake that's coming. So it really stuck around in my head. I've done a lot of different podcast episodes on the prophecies and the likelihood of this future earthquake coming. And one of the prophets that really has struck me and stuck with me was Edgar Casey. He is the sleeping prophet. And I mean, he could literally read a book by sleeping on it, which would just be the most epic thing ever. But he has a lot of prophecies as well about this future earthquake, but also how the globe would look after this earthquake. And so that's one of the items that I really used to make my map of what the Changing Earth world looks like. Now, I do have a map that I share. I'm going to show it on the screen right now. But so I do have this working map that I'm using. And this is one that I would show to the public because I do have my master map. When I designed it, I had to mark out, where all the nuclear power plants were, where all the chemical factories were, where the oil refineries were, where the big items that would be more of a problem in this society where we've lost so much. Can't rebuild fast enough. Can't build it fast enough to save everyone. So the country has to start doing national triage to really decide what areas of the United States are we going to save versus what's getting scrapped. So that's obviously not an easy decision, and it's not one that we're facing in Day After Disaster. Day After Disaster was really about the disaster and how this woman gets back to her family despite all that's going on. So we have the dams collapsing. We have the earthquakes happening. We have some volcanic activity that's happening on the West Coast because of all of this unrest. And there's so many theories that go into this. And if you've ever heard of Space Weather News, if you haven't, you should look it up. Incredible stuff there that really tells about, this upcoming pole shift that we're looking at and how this disaster might actually come about But I had no idea when I just started writing my book about this potential disaster. So we're talking literal earth movement in this disaster. Like, the only way Edgar Casey's map becomes reality is if the land is actually moving. Also, another thing that happens in my book towards the end, is the ice caps were also affected. So not only do you have this literal land movement, but you also have the ice caps that are affected. And so more water that's underground coming up, higher coastlines, plus the coastlines are actually in motion. And so many scientists, like tons of scientists, and I don't disagree, are like, this takes millennia, everything takes millions of years to happen. And, so there's no kind of worry to the people on our planet right now because everything takes so long to happen. But we have things that have happened in history that we can literally look at. I mean, when the New Madrid quake happened, it was months long, first of all. We had geysers of dirt coming up out of the ground. We had areas that went up 2 stories. The Mississippi River literally ran backwards. Earth can be a spontaneous thing as well. It's not like we live on this dead rock that's just slowly making its way through space. We're hurling through space, and it takes a perfect mix of items to keep everything in line here. So the idea that it's just always going to be so stable and we never have to worry about something like that, it doesn't ring true to me. And so that's really where the world came, where it began, right? This is the disaster we're facing, and now what happens? So my second book, Without Land, jumps 9 years. I do have the Las Vegas years that for paid subscribers, they can get a sneak peek into, a glimpse at those 9 years, and it's not a finished product. But I do have the audio drama as well that kind of explores that area. It does a little jump too. That will be completed one day, but in the meantime, we got the 10-book novel series and a lot of working parts going on. So I'll get that completed eventually. But Without Land goes into what is the logical conclusion? After you've had this nationwide disaster, if we have one disaster, then other parts of the country can come and help. And so that's what always allows us to rebuild kind of fast. I mean, there's still people from Katrina and whatnot that are, still haven't rebuilt. So it takes a long time to recover after these types of disasters. Now imagine if it's the whole United States all at once. And then it's not just the United States, it's the whole world at once. That's a completely different story. You cannot, you're going to be more worried about your own region than going and helping somebody else. So that's the world that I was really looking at. And the logical conclusion, when you have so many people who have lost their home, have lost their land, have lost their property, they're going to go and just overwhelm the people who still have property and land and all of that. Plus, the government structures are going to be so scattered. So in my stories, they combined all of the military structures into one, the federal forces. And everyone who had land was allowed to keep their land, but they needed to grow food to help feed everyone. And everybody who was a refugee was put into a refugee camp for their safety so that they had a place to, live happily, be fed. And it really came down to, well, now that we kind of have this figured out, we need hands in the field because of the oil supplies. We would have lost so many oil refineries and everything like that as well, that you're not running tractors. You're not getting parts for tractors. You're not doing any of that. Then we're set back to, olden times here. So they needed the labor, and you have this ready supply, and they're just all in these refugee facilities. So that's what really came about in my world with the adoption program, why that was created, because you have all these people, idle hands are the devil's tool. And so we have all this labor that's needed. Perfect solution. We'll just, rent a family basically where your family can come live on our property. you work our farms, you do those things, and we'll take care of you and you can stay here. So that's how this worked. The other thing that I introduced in my books was the infertilization program. So all refugees at the age of 13 were infertilized because they needed to put a stop on the population rise because they needed more food production to be able to feed everybody. So this was introduced because you have to put a cap on that. And when you have that many people sitting around just chilling, what are you going to be doing, you know? So that's another facet. And a lot of people ask, you know, why not just have the men infertilized or the women infertilized? And I wanted to keep everything equal playing field. I wanted to really introduce a new prejudice because I wanted to take away all of our traditional prejudices. I didn't want to talk about, you know, what political party you were, or what color you were, or what religion you were, or any of that. I didn't want any of that to really matter in this new world. It's really the people that have land versus the people that are now climate refugees and how that structure looks like. So it doesn't matter what you were before. This is what you are now. It really gave it a new playing field. The other thing that I get asked a lot about is from the first book. Erica is in Sacramento and she's in toxic water. Everybody asks me, you know, how the water gets so toxic that it would burn her. Again, it comes from that report that I did in college that, you know, when you have that much water that comes into an area and you have those kind of chemicals in the city that everybody just uses on a daily basis, well, that becomes a slurry. And magnitude, you know, a flooding event on this scale would just really slurry it up. And the Sacramento Valley is a really big growing area for farming as well. And so it would take a long time for that soil to really rebound from being assaulted by all that chemical. So maybe I sci-fi'd it a little bit, you know, and gave it a little bit more punch, but it's definitely still a problem. And one of the things that we talk about on the Changing Earth podcast is, you know, the flooding risk, just what's around in that water. What are you putting yourself at risk for? So that was just a caveat that I really wanted to mention back there. So anyway, we're in them without land. It's about, you know, keeping the population down, putting people to work so they're working, and having labor, growing food, because people have got to be fed. So at the camp level, you have to have people growing food, and then also you have to have food coming from your landowners who are out there in their property still. The other thing that happened during, you know, day after disaster, when all this disaster went down, it would be a major hit to our pharmaceuticals. So you have so many people who, I think it's 1 in 3 people these days of that, and that's from a while ago. It's probably more these days, but you have 1 in 3 people who are on some kind of a prescribed medication, some kind of a medication that they're taking for something. And so when you have a disaster on this scale and you have no more medical pharmaceuticals coming in, you know, you're going to have a large amount of death from that. But it's also something that you have to get back online really, really quickly. They also start manufacturing some things, building some factories and whatnot, and there's refugees working in those areas as well. But, you know, having that food production is going to be key. Having the homes for people being built is going to be key. And without land really brings us into view. And you know what? I've had some people that are like, what's so wrong with the camps? You know, why would you want to get out of the camp? You got food and you've got a bed and you've got a purpose. So why would that be a bad thing? Why is it so bad that Erica needs to escape that? Well, you know, there's freedom in this country, and it's something that is divinely given to every human being through God's will, and no person has that control over you. So when you start making situations like this, there's going to be a fair percentage of people who go, you know what, I want to manifest my own destiny without living in some kind of a camp for the rest of my life. So there's definitely that twee and law, that push and pull that's going to go on. So Erica escapes. That takes us into Walls of Freedom. The family finds out, you know, what do you do? They've already developed this whole, the military forces have developed this whole roundup system. So the federal forces are out there. You got the mercenary forces. These are a private defense contracting company. They're actually the third largest army in the world is the American private defense companies. So these companies get together and decide, hey, we got to provide a check to this federal power because if we just let it run rampant, there's no check to the power. I don't know where I thought this up, but it's an interesting concept because it's a lot of what we talk about these days as far as, if the United States were to become a tyrannical power, that's why we don't want our firearms taken away. But then you're looking at the scale of military power versus civilian power. So if you had a force that had the same type of power that could hold them in check, which ironically enough pretty much does exist, they just don't work together, as in my stories where I bound them all together. The other force that's out there in big numbers is the militia force, because people had to take control of their own towns when this all went down. So, you have to make sure your law enforcement's there. You have to make sure of these things. Law enforcement is not bad. There are so many people waiting for a day when there was no laws so that they could do whatever they want. And they could be that tyrannical ruler and they could take over. And there's more people than you'd think. That's why I created TJ Swenson, to kind of give you the view of, they're out there and this is scary. And so you need to support your people who are willing to be sheepdogs. These are men and women, but a lot of times it is the men, and they're protectors, and they're going to take care of their communities, and they're going to make sure that justice is done. And praise the Lord that there's enough good people out there willing to do that, because there are these major threats out there as well. So you're going to have large militia forces that pop up. And so that's the three really big forces that I created. So the very beginning of Walls of Freedom is really walking you through the wilderness country, showing you, the same area that Erica was kind of in Day After Disaster, what it looks like now. This is 9 years after the disaster. How does our world look? What are we walking into? And so I don't want to give you away. I don't want to give away the story. I just want to talk from more of a worldview and what the world's doing. But eventually Erica goes back into what is, society. It's split into regions. You can see from my map that's been up on the graphic background there. It's all built. It's all split into these regional territories now, where we have the northern region, the southern region, central region, the Appalachian region, and then the Badlands. And so she finally goes, back into the northern region where it's, being rebuilt with society and some kind of normalization. Well, come to find out that, the landowners who were tasked with growing food and making sure that this was done, they're under just as much as a gun pretty much as the refugees in the camps. And they have certain quotas to meet. And if they don't meet that, they have really severe penalties for not meeting quotas. And so the new system, is that really a freedom system as well. And that's why I called it the Walls of Freedom, because they're literally walled off from each other, literally made into almost giant jail cells. I mean, you can't get out without, showing ID and whatnot to travel to another region. And everything was done in the name of safety and protection. They had a big epidemic come through. And so they didn't want people crossing over into different territories, trying to keep people alive with minimal effort. When it comes to survival, you're willing to do pretty much whatever it takes at times. And when you're in that desperate of a situation, that is one time when, you'd probably go past your morals a little bit. And my books really explore that a lot. As far as, this is what was right and good, and this was righteous, and this is what I know, versus this is what I have to do now, which is crazy, and how that works out. So in Walls of Freedom, Erica really rallies the movement back to our Constitution. We can put things back on track. We can be the America that we always were. We just need to make that happen and have the people call for that, have the people demand that happening. So that takes us into book 4, which is Battle for the South. And Erica does defy the system because the next disaster is en route. Mother Nature is just not done. And we're talking mega hurricanes. I actually, we had a big hurricane in Houston, Hurricane, Ian, I think it is. And I wrote that same hurricane about 3 months before that happened with the hospital and everything that they used to keep people at. So it's exactly the same in my book, which is, it just happened that way. It was crazy, actually, but it's just one of those things. So we've got the big storms, we've got more earthquake coming, and then we have water rise again. So this goes beyond the map I've been showing you. This goes into map number 2, where we have even less land now. The Badlands basically get eaten up, and the Appalachian region gets eaten up a lot more. And that goes fully into what Edgar Casey's prediction map is. That's a match for match into that land. So then from there we walk into Dark Days in Denver. That's book 5 in my novel series, and the spoilers kind of coming at this point. So if you haven't read the book series, or you haven't listened to the audio drama and you don't want any spoilers, this is probably now the time to turn it off. But in Dark Days in Denver, we got the Yellowstone eruption, right? And I really wanted to bring that to life. I do study a lot, and there's a couple schools of thought here. So one school of thought is that Yellowstone could still erupt and be this devastational, huge earthquake and ash bomb that just covers the United States and does some major damage to the immediate region there. But there's also schools of thought that say that Yellowstone's moved off of its magma chamber, or it has enough venting, natural venting, that it's not actually going to erupt again as bad as it has in the past, that it might just be an eruption that kind of fizzles. And that's how I present it in my book, is that it had these releases, but it's still a pretty big deal, and it still puts down a great amount of ash, enough that we're blacking out the sun. Plus, I've had eruptions going on. We don't know what other countries look like. At this time when I'm recording this video, the volcanic activity on planet Earth has been really, really upticked. Whereas it used to be unusual to see like 28 volcanoes erupting on planet Earth, we've now been sitting at about 39 volcanoes erupting on planet Earth for a long time. So if you start putting that amount of earthquake damage in, that's causing the Great Quake, that's causing this liquefaction, that's sending ripple effects around our planet, you can bet there's going to be some volcanoes erupting. So all of that goes up into the atmosphere, and now we're looking at, Dark Days in Denver, that there's no more sunlight showing, and all the natural is starting to die. So this is really big societal stress for our survivors, for them to suddenly have to go, the only way we're going to survive is if we can make this self-sufficient, basically go underground. We have all kinds of historic facilities that we've found that are these huge underground caverns, and we don't know why people decided to go underground in the thousands, cities just underground. So this would be a reason to do that, because if you didn't have the sunlight anyway and it's just freezing cold up on top, then you're going to go down and you're going to figure out a way to grow things down there, things you could grow in the dark, things that you need minimal light. We have enough technology to be able to rapidly adapt that to a system where we're growing all of our food inside. Now, you're not going to be able to sustain the population that we sustain that way, unless you suddenly create some, miracle foods that will go a long, long way. So again, you're looking at another dying time. There's a lot of war going on top. Big power struggles right now for who's going to have dominion over what's left. What are the rules going to be? Do you let freedom go? Freedom sometimes looks pretty ugly, when you don't have sheepdogs around to keep the peace, to keep the laws. and just allowing people to go without any law is very, very scary. But also allowing tyrants to just have their way all over the place is also really, really scary. So, you're in survival, you're in that mode, and the planet's falling apart, and society's just trying to scramble to deal with it. So, by the time we hit Endless Night, it's literally the Endless Night. It's a very big power struggle book between Erica Moore, the main character, TJ Swenson, the main character. Very, very big power struggles going on there, but it's also this world without the sunlight, without everything's dying, and the glaciers begin growing. And as we walk into Hope on the Horizon, which is book, right, book 7. Two of the 10 novels are origin novels. So Hope on the Horizon's book 7. And as we walk into that book, we're looking at, these cities are surviving with their underground farms, their underground production. They have greenhouse production, but it's not easy. And people aren't well fed, and they're having a hard time maintaining any kind of livestock, that kind of thing. So, you're talking like bunnies, goats, things you can keep in very, very small areas. Your cattle population, stuff like that, are just starting to die because there's not enough pasture land for big animal, big flora, fauna like that anymore. And then as we go into the bitter end is looking more at the societal effects of what's going on, really gets into the dramas of the story, but it's basically entering into that next ice age that they say is on the doorstep. And so, completely fictional scenario that I dreamed up, that I thought, that I created. But it's been really, really scary to research things and learn how on point it is. For example, the Ogallala Lake in my book is from the Ogallala Reservoir that stretches from Nebraska down to the panhandle of Texas. And so in researching, like, could this happen if there was an earthquake that big? Well, we've been taking tons and tons of water out of the Ogallala Reservoir to grow food in all of the breadbasket in the United States, which is creating a gap. So people are having to put their pipes down even farther to get that water out. So the only thing that's a problem is if it's like limestone down there that could easily deteriorate, easily erode, and create these pockets and create collapse scenarios. And lo and behold, when I researched it, that's exactly what's there. So there's a whole numerous things that can create kind of the scenario in the Change in Earth series, but this is the world that I created, and it's been a lot of fun. And I hope that you guys enjoy the stories and living in the Changing Earth. Check out my book series, Changing Earth Series at .com. You can find all of my stuff there. I'm over on Twitter. I'm over on Facebook. Facebook, not very much, but I'm on Twitter a lot. YouTube, Rumble. So if you guys have any questions, you let me know what you'd like to see explored from the story. In a future video, we're going to go into a lot of the characters, where they came from, kind of what their backstories are. So most videos won't be this long, but the world was essential to lay out in the first video, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. Well, until next time, remember, dream, survive, thrive.